There is a rule some of the wealthiest people in the world have followed for decades, and almost nobody talks about it because it does not sound exciting. It will not make you rich overnight. It will not hand you a hot stock tip. But if you actually understood it and applied it, it could change how much money you have in 10 years more than almost anything else you could do with your time. Charlie Munger followed this rule quietly for most of his life, while people around him chased faster, flashier paths to wealth. Most of those people are not rich today. He is remembered as one of the most successful investors in history. The difference was not luck. It was one habit of mind applied over and over for decades. Without exception, by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what it is, why it works, and why almost everyone ignores it even after they hear it. Here is the strange part. When people finally learn this rule, their first reaction is usually disappointment. It sounds too simple. It does not feel like a secret. It feels like something a teacher told you in 4th grade. That reaction is exactly why most people stay average with money for their entire lives. They go looking for something complicated because complicated things feel like they must be more powerful. Munger believed almost the opposite. He believed most financial failure does not come from a lack of information. It comes from an unwillingness to do simple things consistently for a long time without getting bored or wandering off toward something shinier. Hold on to that because it matters a lot by the end of this video. Start with where the idea actually came from because the origin explains why it works. Charlie Munger grew up in Omaha, Nebraska during the Great Depression. That detail matters more than people realize. He was not born into money. He watched adults around him lose jobs, struggle, and rebuild their lives with almost no room for error. That kind of environment shapes how a person thinks about risk for the rest of their life. Munger did not grow up believing money was something you gambled with. He grew up believing it was something you protected, grew slowly, and never treated carelessly. That is where the seed of today's rule got planted long before he became a billionaire, long before he partnered with Warren Buffett, long before Berkshire Hathaway meant anything to anyone. After serving in the Army Air Corps and studying meteorology, he eventually made it to Harvard Law School without ever finishing an undergraduate degree, which was almost unheard of even then. He became a successful lawyer, but practicing law never fully satisfied him. He kept noticing something. The clients who actually got wealthy were not always the smartest people in the room. They were the ones who made fewer mistakes over a longer stretch of time and let their gains stack on top of each other without interruption. That observation became the foundation of everything he and Buffett built at Berkshire Hathaway, and it became the rule we are unpacking today. So what is the rule? Protect the base before you chase the growth. Say that again in your head. Protect the base before you chase the growth. It sounds almost too obvious to matter. Almost nobody actually lives by it, though. Most people do the exact opposite without even noticing. They chase growth first and only protect the base after something has already gone wrong. The wording alone will not help you if you cannot see it applied. So here is what it actually means. Your base is your foundation. It is the capital you already have. It is your emergency savings. It is the money that keeps your life stable if something unexpected happens. Growth is everything else, the investment gains, the side income, the bigger returns you are chasing. Most people, especially early on, treat growth as the priority and the base as an afterthought. They take on debt to chase an opportunity. They invest money they cannot afford to lose. They skip real savings because saving feels slow and investing feels exciting. Munger thought this order was backwards, and he thought it was one of the most common reasons people who earn good money still end up with very little to show for it by the time they are older. Here is why the order matters so much. If your base is shaky, every bad year forces you to sell your growth assets at the worst possible moment. Think about that for a second. Say you have money invested and the market drops. If your base is solid, meaning real savings and no dangerous debt, that drop is just something you watch happen. It does not touch your daily life. You do not need to sell anything. You wait. If your base is weak, that same drop becomes a crisis. Suddenly you need cash. Suddenly you are forced to sell investments while they are down, locking in a loss you never had to take. That single mistake, forced selling during a downturn because the foundation was never there, has quietly wrecked more wealth throughout history than almost any bad investment decision on its own. That is the first piece of the rule. Protecting your base means your future self never gets forced into a bad decision. This idea is not only about money, though. It is about decision-making under pressure. And Munger spent a good chunk of his life studying exactly that. He liked a concept borrowed from engineering called the margin of safety. If a bridge needs to hold 10,000 pounds, a careful engineer does not design it to hold exactly 10,000 pounds. That would be reckless. Any small error, any unexpected stress, and the whole thing fails. A careful engineer builds it to hold far more than it will ever need to carry. Munger and Buffett applied that same thinking to money. Never build your financial life around exactly what you think you will need. Leave room for being wrong, because you will be wrong sometimes. Everyone is. The people who survived long enough to get wealthy were not right every time. They built enough margin of safety that being wrong did not sink them. That is why the base always comes first. Growth without a margin of safety is not strength. It is fragility wearing a costume. Make this practical for a second, because knowing a principle and applying it are two different skills. Picture two people, same income, same age. Person one goes almost entirely for growth, aggressive investing, debt for opportunities, barely any savings, because they figure their investments will always beat cash sitting still. Person two protects the base first. Real emergency fund, no debt that could threaten their footing. Only once that exists do they start investing consistently. For the first few years, person one usually looks like the winner. Their portfolio might even grow faster. Since more of their money is exposed to bigger risk, person two looks boring in comparison, slow, not exactly impressive at a dinner party. Then time does what time does. Eventually something unexpected hits, a layoff, a medical bill, a market drop at exactly the wrong moment. Person one with no real base gets forced to sell at a loss, take on high interest debt, or both. Person two absorbs the shock and keeps moving. Their investments stay untouched. Their compounding never gets interrupted. Uninterrupted is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Munger and Buffett talked about compounding almost like it was magic, not because the math is hard, but because the patience it demands is so rare. Compounding rewards patience and punishes interruption. Every time you get forced to sell early because your base was never protected, you are not just losing money in that moment. You are cutting off years of quiet future growth that money would have produced if it had simply been left alone. This is part of why Munger cared more about avoiding stupidity than achieving brilliance. In various forms over the years, he said he was not particularly interested in being smarter than everyone else. He was far more interested in not being foolish, because avoiding foolish decisions consistently over a long enough stretch tends to beat occasional brilliance mixed in with regular mistakes. Compare that to how most people are taught to think about money today. Culture loves the big win, the bold bet. The person who risked it all and it paid off. For every one of those stories, there are countless untold ones where it did not pay off. Survivorship bias hides most of the evidence. Munger was well aware of this, and he built his whole approach around avoiding the ruinous mistake rather than chasing the spectacular win. Now, why do people ignore this rule even after they understand it? Because understanding something and actually living by it are not the same thing. Part of it is boredom. Protecting your base does not feel like progress the way watching a stock double does. People are drawn to stimulation and slow. Protective behavior does not offer much of it. That is a psychological trap more than a financial one. Munger studied psychology heavily, not because he wanted to become a psychologist, but because he understood that most financial mistakes are really behavioral mistakes wearing a financial costume. Part of it is social pressure. When everyone around you is talking about their crypto gains or their real estate deal, sitting quietly with a boring emergency fund can feel almost embarrassing. Nobody brags about their base. People brag about their growth. So the most important part of financial stability ends up being the part nobody wants to bring up. And part of it is overconfidence. Most people genuinely believe bad things happen to other people more than to themselves. That bias feels harmless until you notice how it works on money specifically. It convinces people they do not need a strong base because surely they will not be the ones who need it. Then something unexpected happens, because it always does eventually, and they are exposed. Here is a pattern Munger came back to often when talking about human misjudgment not tied to any one person. A talented, hardworking person earns a strong income for years. On paper, they look successful. But instead of building a real base, they stretch a little further every year into new investments, more debt, more exposure. Nothing goes wrong for a while, and that quiet keeps reinforcing the belief that nothing ever will. Then a downturn hits at exactly the wrong time. because there was no base, no margin of safety. It does not just slow them down, it sets them back years, sometimes decades. Munger pointed to plenty of real examples of this across booms and busts throughout financial history, not as a rare accident, but as a pattern that keeps repeating. That is part of why he thought studying failure was often more useful than studying success. Study why people succeed, and you mostly hear about talent, timing, effort. Study why people fail, especially people who had every advantage, and the same avoidable mistakes keep showing up. Weak foundations, overconfidence, growth chased before the base was ever built. So how does someone actually apply this in a way that is not just an idea floating in the air? First, figure out what your base actually is. This looks different for everyone, but the core stays the same. Your base is enough financial stability that a serious, unexpected setback does not force you into a bad decision. For some people, that means several months of essential expenses sitting in accessible savings. For others, it means paying down high interest debt first, since that debt is working against your stability every single day it exists. Second, get the sequence right. Munger never argued growth does not matter. It matters enormously over time, but order matters just as much as the goal, base first. Once that foundation is real, most of your attention can shift towards steady long-term growth. Third, and this is where most people trip, resist the urge to abandon that sequence the moment a tempting opportunity shows up. Munger was known for saying the big money is not in the buying or the selling. It is in the waiting. Waiting is not passive. Downright, it is an active choice to protect what you have built so it keeps compounding without interruption. Fourth, understand that protecting your base is not a one-time task, it is ongoing. Life changes, expenses change, responsibilities change, and the base needs to be checked and maintained along the way. You do not build it once and forget about it, any more than a gardener plants a tree and assumes it will thrive forever without any more attention. Here is something people tend to get wrong about all this. Protecting your base does not mean fearing risk. Munger was not risk-averse. He and Buffett made huge, concentrated bets throughout their careers. The difference was they never took risks that could threaten the foundation itself. They took risks with the portion of capital that, if lost, would not wreck their stability. That distinction is everything. Calculated risk taken from a position of strength can build real wealth over time. Desperate risk taken from a position of weakness, historically, tends to destroy it. That is part of why Munger liked what he sometimes called sitting on your hands. Not laziness, discipline. Most investors feel this itch to constantly be doing something, buying, selling, adjusting, reacting. Munger thought that edge was one of the most expensive habits in all of investing. People who protected their base and then simply waited patiently while their money compounded tended to outperform the people who kept fidgeting with their own portfolio. Underneath all of this, though, it is really about peace of mind, not spreadsheets. Think about how differently these two people move through an ordinary week. The person with a weak base carries a quiet, low-grade financial anxiety they may not even name. Every surprise bill feels like a small emergency. Every market dip feels threatening. Every decision gets made a little out of fear. The person with a strong base experiences money differently. Setbacks still happen because they happen to everyone, but those setbacks land as a temporary inconvenience, not a crisis, because the foundation was built to absorb exactly that. This person can watch the market fall and feel mostly patience because their base is intact and their compounding has not skipped a beat. That gap between low, great anxiety and grounded patience might be the real reward hiding inside this whole rule. It is not only about ending up with more money, though it usually does exactly that over time. It is about the freedom of never being forced into a decision you did not actually choose. Munger pointed out more than once that clear thinking becomes almost impossible under financial pressure. When your base is weak and an emergency hits, you are not really thinking anymore. You are reacting out of fear, and fear-driven money decisions tend to be some of the worst decisions a person can make. Protecting your base is not just a financial strategy, it protects your ability to think clearly when it matters most. So, back to where this started, the rule that could genuinely change how much money you have in 10 years, hiding inside something that sounds almost too plain to matter. Protect the base before you chase the growth. It will not trend anywhere. Nobody will feel like they cracked a secret formula overnight reading this, but it is exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous discipline that separated Munger's long-term thinking from the impatient, reactive approach that slowly wears down most people's finances over time. The people who build lasting wealth are rarely the ones who found one perfect investment. They are the ones who protected their foundation long enough to let ordinary decisions compound into something extraordinary. If there is one thing worth keeping from all of this, let it be this: slow down before you speed up, build the base before you chase the growth. Then, once that foundation is real, let time do what almost nobody has the patience to let it do. That is the rule almost everyone ignores. And that is exactly why so few people ever benefit from it. If this changed how you look at your own habits even a little, stick around for the next video, where we go deeper into the psychology Munger spent his life studying, the same psychology that quietly decides whether most people build wealth or slowly lose it without ever understanding why. Because in the end, the biggest returns rarely come from the boldest moves. They come from the quiet decisions almost nobody else was patient enough to make.